So last time we did some data binding, and today we're going to keep building the fish card. The first thing that I want to show you is how to react to the user clicking the search button. To that, we're going to supply an event handler. Now, event handler isn't anything new. JavaScript has its version as well. When we specify a Blazor event handler, we're going to remember to use the leading at. For example, here at onClick equals search. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the event. If you are already familiar with it, great. Otherwise, I want you to pick this concept up. Basically, an event is a mechanism for one object to talk with another. For example, here, when you click a button, click is the event on the button. So this is the first object, that is the button, right? Now, when the click really happens, button is the object to emit the event, and other classes or other objects could then step in to supply an event handler, or sometimes even more than one event handlers. So these handlers, they aren't part of button. In our case, it belongs to fishcard home, right? And it communicates with button to do something when click happens. And that is the whole picture of an event handler. Now, based on that, what we will need to supply as search here is a delegate. And again, it executes when the button is clicked. Now I'm going to create a method of search. By giving it a method, the red squiggle is gone already. That means search will be executed when the button is clicked, but there's going to be nothing. So let's fill in something. Last time, we talked about binding the value from the input to the property keyword here. So as the first step, let's output it when the button is clicked. Let's add a prefix so it will be easier to recognize. Let's see how it looks like. When I search for salmon, and once, twice, several more clicks. And that's it. That's how we react to button click. The keyword, event handler, right? Now, when we search on fishcard.codewizard.net, we see the result, which matches the keyword, as well as recommendation on it, right? Let me show you how is that built. The very first thing is that we need a module to store the data. Let's see. The data, in this case, it is very simple. We're going to have a name for the fish and a recommendation. We're going to have 3 levels of recommendations: avoid, good, or best. For example, the salmon is going to have a recommendation level of best, bluefish is good, swordfish, avoid. Simple? Simple. So we're going to create 2 classes, fish item and recommendation. Let's see the code. Here, I'm creating a folder for the models, and I'm going to create a class named fish item. Let's put it in namespace of fishcard frontend.models. Well, let's call it fishcard.models. Chances are, in the future, the models is going to be reused by the backend. Not a big deal, I just want to let you know why I changed it. The class by itself is very simple. If you have ever heard POCO, like plain old COR object, I believe that is what it's short for. This is one of them. Again, not the point. We have a name, we have a recommendation, and we're going to create an enumeration for the recommendation. This is part of the model. I'm going to put it in the same namespace. Here, instead of class, I'm going to create an enumeration. We have void, we have good, and we have best. Okay, now we have the module. We're going to have a class to return them. Oh, this is an interesting spot. I'm going to use this code as an introduction to dependency injection in Blazor. There are 3 objects and 2 activities in dependency injection that are important. And I'll use a simple code to go over them with you before we jump right into the fishcard building. The service is a class that does something For example, here it prints a hello di, easy peasy. Then there's usually a container. Conceptually, it is used to code the dependency graph. So sometimes it's called a dependency container, and sometimes it's also called the immersive control container, or sometimes IOC container, or under the context, the container. Different framework will have different versions of implementations for the containers. And in Blazor and the ASP.NET Core, the one that is provided by Microsoft is called a service collection. To access it, we're going to use this web application builder and the services properties on it. Here what I'm doing is register a service into the container. And that is the first activity, registering. And once it is registered, it can be used. And the object to use the service inside the container is the consumer. And the way to use it is injection. Now, there are different ways to do the injection, and this is one way that you do in the ASP.NET Core application. Basically, when you want to use it, you prefix the service in a parameter using from services attribute. And when you do this, the dependency injection container knows how to inject this service into the place that you want to use it. In this instance, it is this method. And that is the basic concept of dependency injection. You create a service, you register in it, and when you need to use it, you inject it. Let's quickly go over what it looks like when it's running. Here I'm going to start the app inside the console. I'm going to use curl to hit the endpoint of slash, which is the one that uses the service, right? And you will see hello di being output. If you take a deep look at the code, you're probably going to notice that I didn't call into any constructor because that is managed by the dependency injection container. There's a lot more about the dependency injection. It is a topic by itself. If you are interested, check out the playlist about dependency injection. And I'll put it on the right up corner. Coming back to fishcard, let's build a service. Let me create a services folder. And let's call our very first service, fish data service. So what does fish data service do? It returns a series of fish items. At this moment, we don't have any data source yet. I'm going to hard code a list of fish items. In a bit, I'm going to show you how to put the data into a JSON file. And in the future, those data will coming down from the backend. So let's do that one step at a time. I'm making it in asynchronous method because pretty much for data fetching, it's going to be an asynchronous operation. Okay, so if everything goes as planned, we're going to have a salmon and a halibut. Now let's register it. And you already know what register means. Oops, sorry, you call add, you don't really call registering. There's no such method as register. And we give it a service type. Now, what is this doing? This puts the fish data service into some place called IOC container, so that when it is requested, the container will be responsible for creating the instance of the service. We register the class. The next step is to inject it so that we can use it. Coming to fishcard home, this is where the service is needed. This is a partial class for the fishcard home page, right? There is actually a caveat. If you are familiar with the dependency injection in C# in other project types, you're probably going to do what I'm doing. That injects a dependency on the constructor. And that is not going to work because the Blazor class requires a parameterless constructor. And what we did breaks it. So here, we will need to inject the service using another technique, property injection. Let's start by making the service field a property. And then we're going to mark it using inject attribute. Now, at this moment, what you are seeing is same concept, but different implementations, right? An injection is an injection in a different way. And this is the point that I want to make. The specific implementation doesn't matter that much. You can always search online. The point is to gain the concept. Assuming the service will be injected correct this time, I'm moving forward to consume it a little bit. Still remember this uninitialized async method that we learned in the component video? It will be called by the render handler. And for now, let's return how many fish items got returned. Let's run it now. Another error? Let's see what's going on. Oh, the property has no setter. Okay. That is easy. We just come back and add it. Now it works. And let's check the console. There are 2 items. Yay! Congratulations to ourselves, the first dependency injection code. Okay, move on. We haven't finished the search function yet. So considering we have limited the number of fish returned, I'm going to save them in the field. Once we have that, search becomes a filter down to whatever matches the keyword. And then we need another array as a subset of all fish. And we're going to call it result. Result will include all the fishes, and the name of the fish contains the keyword. It's going to be case insensitive. It will also be ordered by the name, small details. And when keyword is null, we don't want to show anything. Okay, now assuming it works, zoom in again, right? Okay, assuming it works, I'm going to show you how to bind a list onto the reader page. That is simple. You use the for each directive, and it will give us an item one by another so that we can bind it later. Usually, we want to check to making sure that the connection by itself is not null. Otherwise, an exception will be thrown when you try to enumerate on a non-object. Now, again, without any style, I'm going to bind the fish name and the recommendation into divs. And since fish is a C# object, we need to prefix it with that. And C# properties are case sensitive. Let's run and see. Hey, it succeeded at this time at least. Now, if I search A, both salmon and halibut is going to show up. They both contains A. And if I search B, only halibut is going to show up. Now, if you watch this only, the functionality is already there. But if you are coding with me, quickly you're going to notice that after search, the keyword is left there. Let's quickly update the code so that the keyword will be removed. Code is simple. The idea behind this is the two-way binding. The keyword goes from the input box to the keyword property. And if you give a new value to the keyword property, in this case, a null, it will clear the value from the input box. Let's see it. So the binding directions from the control to the module, as well as from the module to the controls. Let's see another practical feature. On the fishcard side, when you focus on input box, or if you type in something, there's a candidate list. It is a prompt that will help reduce typo and then make it easier for the mobile users. Let's take a look how to implement that. It is very simple nowadays with modern browsers. The feature of the HTML that we're going to use is this data list. A data list will have an ID and the options in it. And then it will be referenced from the input box using the property of list. And I will show you how to populate the list in Blazor. Firstly, you probably notice the content of the list is actually all fish there. We already have it here, so there's no code change needed. What we want is going to be in the reader page to have a data list. Since there is no visual for the data list by itself, it can be put at any place. We're going to give it a name of all fish. Now we want to bind a list of the fish. So what we do, we use for each. Instead of div, we're outputting options. Now we're going to update the input tag to use the list. This is the HTML. We use list, not add list. So how does it look like now? When you focus on the input box, or if we type in something, very quick, right? Isn't it easy? Okay, everything looks like it's wired up, except the data of the fish is still hard coded. The data probably comes down from the backend, but also in a real project, there is probably some time that the backend is still under construction. To get the front end unblocked, we usually will negotiate a data contract with the backend first, and once that is decided, we're going to mark the data and put it into a JSON file and treat it as if it's returned by the backend. This way, not only can we develop faster, we could also leverage the JSON file for testing. I'm going to show you how to fetch the data from a JSON file. Step 1, create a JSON file. Now for Blazor, JSON is going to be a 3W resource. It is just like the images that we talked about last time. We're going to put it under www root. Here I create the fishdata.json, and the content is going to be an array of fish items. Let's fast forward so that you don't need to wait for me, but at the end, we're going to have 3 data points. The way to fetch content from JSON is through HTTP client. Eventually, again, the data is going to come in down from the backend. And guess which service I'm going to use to fetch it? HTTP client, right? So there's that there. Now let's see how can we use the HTTP client in another class that is a fish data service. Here, I'm going to use dependency injection again. I'm going to say the fish data service depends on HTTP client. To inject it, keyword injection. Since fish data service is a plain service, a plain class, it's not a reader page. In other words, we can just use the service injection on the constructor. Let's see how to use it. Let's say HTTP client get async. Now, usually it's going to be a URL for the backend. For us, we get it from the JSON file relative to the base of www root, right? Let's wait for the asynchronous method to return. Passing on the cancellation token. We can leverage the normal methods on the HTTP client, like ensure success status code, to making sure that the data is returned successfully. And then we're going to deserialize the content of the response. Do we need a JSON serialization option? Let's leave it for now. Now we're going to make sure that we got the result, or we're going to return an empty of enumerable. We don't return null, so that the client, the caller, do not need to deal with it. I think this is a good coding practice. If you are interested in understanding why, check out my video about empty, and I'll put a link to the right upper corner. Now coming back, let's see, does it work? Hey, yeah, there's error. Let's do a quick debug. It looks like we do have 3 fish items. That means the item is there. Probably the names are empty somehow. Now, since we have the name bound to the options in the data list, we can check it there. I just need to locate it. See, there's no name. I think I know why. Let's take a look at the data in the JSON file. The fish name and the recommendations are lowercase. But in our model, let's see if I can say it correct. Uses a Pascal naming convention. There are several ways to fix that. You could make them 100% match, or you could do what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a JSON serializer options to the default of web. And that makes the serializer case insensitive. And we're going to use it when we deserialize the object. And let's run it now. Ta-da! 3 items. Okay, my friend, we built a search. We learned dependency injection. We learned to use the Datalist and how to bind the multiple items from a list or an array. So next time I'm going to talk about the styles. Give me a thumb up. Stay tuned. Keep coding. Keep improving. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care. So what does fish... Fish. Yes, a fish. Coming to fish home or fishcard home. Which home is it? To the default of dev. Where did I get the idea of dev?